This video goes over common mistakes in RIP number 5. Number 1, if we have real estate must get no more than 2 times the amount of stocks, or she must put less than twice as much money in real estate as in the stocks, either one. So if we are taking a look at this particular situation, real estate must get no more than 2 times stocks. So if I look at that in chart format, let's say I have $15, real estate gets 2 times or less for stocks. So whatever the situation is, if I put in $15, 10 or less goes into real estate, which means 5 or more would go into stocks, right? So that's kind of how it would go. If I put, let's say, less than or equal to 100 here, then I would have to have greater than or equal to 50 in the stocks. So that's kind of what it would look like. So in that case, if I wrote that as an equation, that means the real estate is less than or equal to 2 times the stocks. So if I'm writing an equation for that, it would be this. If X represents real estate and Y represents stocks, this would be the equation. It would not be 2X less than Y. It would not be Y greater than 2X. It would be neither of those things. And that was probably the most common mistake. Number 2, make sure that you put a scale on your graph and label the axes. Notice that when I labeled them, I put not only the labels, but also that it's in thousands of dollars. Number 3, list your intersections. Don't have us guess. So actually list where your intersection points are. Quite a few people did not list those. Number 4, find your intersections. Don't guess at what they are. Notice that this intersection is at 200 thirds, 100 thirds, or if you wrote it, it would be 66.6 repeating and 33.3 repeating if you wrote it in decimal format. What a lot of people were doing was they would take an answer like this, or the equivalent answer for their incorrectly graphed line up here with y equals 2x. They would take this point and they would see it's somewhere between 60 and 70, or 65 and 70, somewhere between 30 and 40, and they would guess that it's 67 and a half, 32 and a half, or something equivalent for this line up here. And guessing is not a good method for finding the intersection points. So how can you find them? Well, you know that it's the intersection of this line and this line. So you can actually make a substitution. Take 1/2 x, plug it in for y. So you get x plus 1/2 x is less than or equal to 100,000. 3/2 x less than or equal to 100,000. Then you solve, you get x is less than or equal to 200,000 over 3, which if you're in thousands would be 200 over 3. So you can actually solve these things. Like, you don't have to just guess. The other thing that happened that I didn't list is that a lot of people did not shade. So make sure that you're shading your graph. The only time that you wouldn't shade is if you actually thought that this was x plus y is equal to 100,000, which is a reasonable thing to think in this problem, because it says that Tony acquired $100,000 and she intends to invest it. It does not mean that she has to invest 100,000, but if you read it that way, it would actually be kind of reasonable. In that case, you wouldn't shade. You would only find things that had to be on this 100,000 line. Okay, now, number 5, answer in context with units. So this is something that's important. Dollars, saying where each of those dollar amounts goes. And then answers cannot be rounded to illegal answers. Here's what I mean by that. A lot of people rounded properly. So something like $66,666.67. Notice that this number is actually now more than twice as big as that number, which is illegal because we said that that can't happen, right? So make sure that we don't round answers to things that are illegal. They have to make sense in the context. Also, that happened a lot when people were guessing. So some people just guessed that the point was something like 70 comma 40. Well, that's greater than 100. So you can't have that. I mean, your guess clearly doesn't make sense given the constraints of the problem that x plus y has to be less than $100,000, right? Less than or equal to. So that's kind of a big deal. Last thing that we're going to talk about is what if you treated it like it was less than? So the wording originally in the problem was less than. So what would that look like? Well, this would be a dotted line. These would be strictly less than or greater than signs. So these points cannot be the answer, but it can be super close to the answer. And so if we look at this particular graph, we know that we were told that answers have to be on the ends. So I'm just going to drag this point around, and as I move it to the right, obviously the revenue or the amount of money that you make goes bigger. And as I go up, the amount of money gets bigger. So if I move to the left or down, the amount of money gets smaller. So what I want to do then is I want to maximize it. So maybe I can go to some kind of endpoint, right? Well, these endpoints end up working out to be the biggest in the y's and the biggest in the x's. But notice that what happens as I move along this edge is that it continues to get bigger as I move along this edge. So yes, this particular point at the very edge of this intersection does not work if you treat this like it is a dotted line, like it is a strictly less than or greater than problem. But this is not the best choice all the way up here, because if I just take a very small movement a little bit off of that line, notice that this is still 9.165, which is way better than 9.05. So all you have to do is just take a itsy bitsy tiny movement, and it's still better. Just very small. It's still going to be better as long as you're close to this point. So even though you can't be actually on that point, you can be really close to it. And so how does that actually get represented? Well, that gets represented because if I look at this specific point, that would be at $66,666.66 repeating cents, basically. And this other one would be 33333 and 33 repeating cents. Well, what is the smallest amount that's really, really close to that point? It's actually this one. Just taking it and moving ever so slightly inside. It's still the best bet, even though it's not necessarily on the line, because you can't actually be on the line if you treat it like it's a strictly less than problem. It's the best bet since it's as close to that one as possible. So that's why you would want to check that point anyway, and then try and get something as close to that as possible, because something that's really, really close to that is going to get you something that's really, really close to this amount of money.